There are multiple reasons why we should preach the Old Testament prophets. I would suggest the first and most obvious reason is simply the sheer size of the prophetic literature in the Old Testament. If you consider Isaiah to Malachi, that's similar in size to the entire New Testament. And so if we are committed to preaching the entire counsel of God, then we must preach the Old Testament prophets. But apart from their size, I would say the importance of their message is the primary reason why we must preach the Old Testament prophets. The Old Testament prophets offer us a spectacular view of God. He is the one, He is ultimate, He is sovereign, He is transcendent, and yet He looks after His people, He cares for His people. He is the shepherd who gathers His flock. And so we have this remarkable view of God in the prophets. And then another reason for preaching the Old Testament prophets is that both Jesus and various New Testament authors often refer back to the Old Testament prophets. Actually, some of the most famous sayings of the Lord Jesus come from the Old Testament prophets. For example, the whole dialogue with Nicodemus about the necessity to be born again. The background to that conversation is Ezekiel 36 and 37. And unless we have that background, we risk misunderstanding the teaching of Jesus. And so I would say we need to preach the Old Testament prophets, because if we don't, we're missing out because of the importance of their message. And also we risk misunderstanding the message of Jesus and several New Testament authors who are referring back to the Old Testament prophets.